All right, so good morning. Hopefully everyone had a nice week. So we'll continue our series of discussions and topics that were brought forth by you to talk about how we Christian. So, memory verse, why are we here? Put it in your pocket. You should be a task-driven individual. There's your task. All right, so this morning, the topic is eternity, but probably not the way you think. So we'll go through and we'll do some explanations of that, and then we'll get into the topic. So as it was presented to me as a request, this is not about the concept of eternity, okay? Everyone knows the definition of the word eternity? It's a really long time, okay. The reason the individual didn't want to speak about it that way is because I think that the Bible is absolutely clear on what eternity is. Christ spoke about it easily 28 times, and it's mentioned throughout the Old Testament. So it's not that. That's a definition that everyone should understand if you just simply read your Bible, okay? A verse, I think one of the best on the topic is there in John chapter 5, verse 24. And I think it's one of the best because it talks about the entire concept as we understand it holistically. It hits all the marks. And so he talks about what you have to do and who it is we are addressing, and then what it is and what it means. And so if you need an eternal life verse, then I think that that's probably one of the better ones to put it all into perspective. Okay, so the bottom line is everybody gets to go somewhere, right? After we're done with what goes on in this mortal coil. We know what we believe. We know there are others out there who believe other things. But for us as Christians, everybody gets to go somewhere, right? No get out of jail free cards. So that's the biblical concept of eternity. What we're going to talk about this morning is a little bit different. So this is really a discussion about how we discuss eternity. So this is how we Christian. How do we use this topic? So I think there are two times that we as Christians talk to non-Christians, and the subject or topic of eternity is in the conversation. There may be others. That's perfectly fine. We can run down those rabbit holes if you want to raise your hand and address them. No issues. So when do you think they are? What are the two times you ever talked to a non-Christian? Please tell me you've talked to a non-Christian at some point in your daily walk.
When a loved one dies.
Okay, absolutely.
And when somebody asks,
Yeah, you're
why you're either happy or why you're okay, and it's fine with that.
okay. And you're both right. And so the two I came up with was during conversations about Christ and at end-of-life moments. And we're going to dive into both of those two. The end-of-life moments being the bigger one because it has more subsets. So first, we'll do conversations about Christ. So this is your test. Go ahead. We do. It becomes fairly consuming at the end. So if you didn't hear that, then the comment that was made over here is, when you're young, you're bulletproof, and you don't have a lot of conversations about end of life. However, is there anyone in here who has not lost a loved one at some point in your life, no matter how young you are? There's always an older generation waiting to pass to show us the way. But you're right, we move right through that very quickly and relatively unscathed because it'll never happen to us, right? Well, wait till it does. We're going to have that conversation. So, this is your test, right? You've been waiting all your life as a young Christian. Every day you've been working out on the Bible, practicing, and somebody finally asks you, and you have the conversation. So, the most common thing people come to me and say is, I don't know what to say. And they use that as an excuse to never have the conversation. So stop that if that's you. That's weak. I'm not going to allow it. It's ridiculous. What if Christ had decided he didn't want to go on the cross because it was going to hurt? And it did hurt. So we have no excuse. So I will ask you to consider it this way. Just simply trust yourself and trust the Spirit. If nothing else, just tell them who you are. Because you can't do it wrong. You really can't. There's absolutely no way to have this conversation. Well, there is one way, and it was the way I started having it with most people as an argument, and I was always wrong. And so you can do that wrong. But if you're doing it any other way, if you trust yourself, you trust the Spirit, you let Christ speak for himself, then you're okay. Because what I think we fail to understand is that it's not about us. I'm not winning a discussion. I didn't win them over for the Lord. I didn't do anything. Either they decide to accept the Lord and the Lord accepts them, or nothing happens, period. So let it be that. And don't worry about the conversation. It'll happen. And then at the end of it, if nothing good comes out of it, but that's not really right. If it's unproductive and they don't make the decision we would prefer them to make, then you walk away. You kick the dust off your feet and you continue your march.
And they might make that decision later.
Right. Yeah, one of the best conversations I had with a guy 10 years later was that he's now a Christian. And that he remembered the discussions we had at work about Christ. This was when you could talk about Christ in the Army. Okay. Yeah. Planting a seed is wonderful. So that's the during conversations about Jesus part. Because we need to move on into the rest of the discussion. It's easy, but it is one of the times when we talk about eternity. So the second one, end-of-life moments or events. As stated earlier, if you haven't yet had one somewhere in your life, you will. But I think it comes in a couple of flavors. So the first one is the abrupt end. So this is the accidental death. Have you ever been witness to one? Okay. I was saving you because I was expecting maybe you would tell me one day that you felt like murdering somebody and we'd have that conversation, but it'd be different. It happens to everyone. So, you are at the scene of the accident. What do you do? How do you handle this moment? I've had to have people come up with some pretty contrived situations in order to justify it. There's a scene in the movie God Is Not Dead. Now, I'm not a fan of the movie. I think it's poorly written and poorly directed. And I'm a movie critic, apparently. But there is one scene in there I'm a real big fan of, and it is an end-of-life conversation. And the protagonist throughout the movie is going to die. He's been in an accident. Clearly states in the script that we are going to state your accident injuries to you, and they are fatal. You will not live. And someone has the conversation with him about Christ. 15 seconds or less. And they have the conversation. And it's amazing. It's almost the script you might want to memorize in the event that you have to have that type of abrupt end-of-life conversation. So, however, I've had people get wrapped around some axles and tell me that it couldn't happen that way because they weren't in the water. So I gave them an opportunity. I said, okay, contrive the situation for me. And so what happens is we're in a river. Somehow there's a freshwater shark. Someone is bit. I happen to be there on the shore. I can enter the water and we can have this conversation. So now we can have the conversation. And I ask them, what happened to the shark? And they're like, well, he floated downstream. Okay, at least he's out of the way. So now I can have the conversation. So what is it? What do we do? So how about that? I think the worst thing you can do to anyone who is suffered a life-ending injury is lie to them about its severity. Don't do this. There's no problem with taking care of the immediate need and requirement and then asking them this question. Are you a Christian? Okay. Yes. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that because I am sorry, sir, but we're probably at the end for us. So, what if they say no? What if they say no to the offer? Would you like to discuss Christ in what is possibly your last few minutes of life? And they say no. It is their choice. You got to let it be their choice. It's just the way it works sometimes. Had a friend, atheist their entire life.
I want to say, in this moment, it's really not important who you are. When you are facing that someone is dying, it is. I have this gift from God. When something that's happening, my brain is so cold. I organize everything because I'm just not when my husband died, and it was different. But when it's car accident or something happening. Even doctors are sometimes there and they don't know what to do. And then I organize the situation.
Right.
It is who you are. And believe me, you are not asking them, are you a Christian? Whoever is there is just a human being that you want to help.
I disagree.
Okay.
But we can't. We can disagree. That's okay. I'll get to exactly why here in just a moment when I explain another scenario. So I'll leave it. And we'll go here. The first thing I am foremost in my life is a Christian. I'm not my job. I'm Denise's husband second. I am my children's father third. I'm a Christian first, foremost, and always. And so, however, I think what you're saying, Vesta, is that there is a time, if there is time available, and a right place for that conversation. It's not the thing I'm rushing up to ask a guy who's obviously dying. And I think that's what you mean, and I think you're correct in that. If I can modify what you said a little bit, and I'll say this. These are the three most important things you can say to someone who's facing an end-of-life moment. First, foremost, and always. No one wants to die emotionally abandoned and alone. No one. I don't care who you are. So first, let's do the emotional triage, and let's get this person comfortable with the moment that's happening. Because between the two of us, I'm going to go on afterwards in this life, and he's not. And so I think the three most important things you can let somebody know is that they're not alone and that you'll be with them through the end. And it works in any situation. I've dealt with end-of-life situations in combat and out. It works in all of them. So be human. This is what I think you mean. Be human, first, foremost, and always. However, once they were comfortable, I'm with you. Hey, listen, you're probably going to pass. They're on their way. Your injuries are very severe. I would like to ask you one question. Are you a Christian? Now, again, we got to be in a river. There was a shark bite. There's some other things that have to happen. But it's not an unfair question to ask someone when they're passing. And it doesn't have to be immediate, right? There's another time. This is the way we mostly go, right? We spend our time exiting the world, especially given the beauty that is modern medicine. And we can buy ourselves some time back with science. And we do that. How about that? I had a friend. Atheist their entire life. Absolutely atheist. Combative about it. Everyone else in her family circle is a Christian. Everyone else, all of us. are Christians. She goes her entire life passive-aggressively ridiculing us and making fun of our beliefs, and we come to her end-of-life moment. I hope it doesn't hurt your feelings too much to know that not a one of us spoke to her about Christ. We'd been doing it all her life. And there was actually a family get-together where it was discussed because some people wanted to. Well, they wanted someone else to. And the answer was no. She knows we're all Christian. She can ask. I don't need that bruise one more time. But we never talk about that. There are times where it might not be appropriate. And we let her go in the end. We loved her, and we let her go. So, once again, though, sometimes we can't help ourselves, right? I know people who would have absolutely beat their head into that wall one more time, angrily been mad at her for not making the change on her deathbed, knowing what her future is. Huh? It is. So I would rather that if perhaps the answer is no, we show them the respect we would expect them to show us for the decision we have made. So, Jerry Barber. I don't know that I would call Jerry a friend, but I would most certainly call Jerry a mentor. I stole that saying from him, and you'll hear it from me plenty of times, but for at least once I wanted to attribute the name to it. Jerry gave me the exact way I needed to say goodbye to a lot of people when we have a difference about faith. And I'll never forget it, and I've thanked him many times. And I've used it. This is exactly the script I used to say goodbye to my mother. It is the script I used to say goodbye to my brother. It will be the script I use to say goodbye to you. Because I think it's wonderful.
You should both die quicker than us.
I should what?
What if you die before we do?
I expect you to use this one for me. However, the way I'm really trying to work my life these days is that I hope I say I love you enough to people now to where they already know, and that we don't have anything to forgive between us. That's what I would hope, but it doesn't always quite work out that way, because I have a bad habit of saying what I think.
When my father was dying, we were not talking about Christian stuff. And one moment he said, I'm going to be with my parents. And it's okay. That was that.
Yeah. So that was his belief. Now, Croatia's a Catholic state. I mean, not formally, but it's a Catholic state. You guys don't understand what it's like to live in a Catholic state, where instead of American flags on certain days of the year, the Catholic flag comes out, and it gets hung from people's windows. And you are a member of the church as they understand it. So I think your father probably knew he was a Catholic.
That's the story. My family hates Catholic Church because of the Catholic priests. And it's long story. So, however, in the end, that he said, I'm going to be with my parents.
Right.
That was much more stronger than anything else that he said. That he believed in the life,
Yeah.
he believed in the basic of the Christian faith.
Yeah. He understood there was a heaven. And what young boy doesn't believe that mom and dad are there waiting for him? So did you guys hear all that conversation? So not a lot of religious end-of-life discussion with your father because he already had a place to go and he was headed there. However, we feel a little compelled to have these discussions with family members and loved ones who are not believers as they stay longer and longer and longer, right? Last one. If you don't start chattering, I'm gonna yield back some moments of your time here at the end, and we'll have time to visit. So, funerals of non-believers. Who's been to one? All right. Everyone's hand should be up. We should all know non-believers, and they pass. So, again, another story. Same family. We go to the funeral, and overwhelmingly non-Christians, because that was who she associated with in her life. Absolutely no mention of the Christian God, although there was mention to many other beliefs. And people got up and said their piece and sat down. I didn't feel the need to get up and defend my God. Who there would have listened? What's our purpose? Christ does not need me to defend him, ever. He does that on his own. And it would not have been the words that they needed to hear to give them any comfort. Have you ever actually been the best you can be for someone by just shutting your mouth and doing a thing for them? And sometimes the thing is nothing. Go ahead.
Yeah, when Tani's and my mother died back in 2014, we went out for the funeral. It was very much an example, I think, what you're talking about now. As part of the funeral ceremony, the minister of the church that she belonged to out there took the opportunity to preach about a half an hour sermon. It's like, okay, I was really ambivalent about it because on one hand, you want the word out, you want to do this, but on the other hand, this is my mom's story. We can talk about Jesus a little bit later.
Did you hear that? No one comes to a funeral to hear a sermon. You'll never convince any pastor, minister, priest, otherwise. But however, the proof is in yourself. Ask yourself why you're there. So remember who the funeral's for. Who is it for? Survivors, the living, the remaining. The last person it's for is the deceased. They're gone. It is. It is yes, funerals are cultural. Yes. Okay, thank you. Because I was trying to figure out where I was going to go with cultural, but I got a lot of places to go with closure, because that really is the purpose. Is so that we can say goodbye, because we know that this is definitive. You hear stories of people getting up out of their own casket, but I honestly never want to witness it. I don't want to be there for that. So remember who it's for, and who they are. And be a good Christian. Mind your P's and Q's. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I know what it means. So, how about that? Always time to show love as a Christian? Have you ever seen someone condemn someone or condemn the deceased at a funeral? I have. It was wow. And then it was like the wheels just came off the train, and the whole funeral just drove into uncharted territory, and it ended up in a fight. So you've seen the movie where chaos is going around somebody, and they're just sitting there, kind of smiling, just trying desperately not to be a part of it. That was my moment. I've never seen it, and I won't go to funerals now where I think it might happen, to include almost passing on my mother's, because I thought it would happen. And then people started saying they couldn't come, and I started being really relieved, because then I could go, and a fight wouldn't break out. At least one, I wouldn't have to watch it. So let's not do that. We're going to get to why. There's there's a story in the Bible about that here in just a moment. But there's always time to be loving and kind. So be prepared to grant mercy. Everybody know the definition of mercy? Who can give me a definition of mercy? What God does for us? All right. Right. Forgiveness you don't deserve. So do that. Not just to the deceased, but to others that are there. This is not the time of the airing of the grievance. This is just not. The easiest thing to do at a funeral is to shut your mouth and comfort people. Often the best thing to do. How about because of that? Have you ever, you guys have already said no, but like I said, I've seen someone get judged at a funeral. It was amazing. I've seen ministers graveside render a fire and brimstone sermon against the deceased. It made me wonder why the family invited a priest when they weren't religious. I'm not sure what they thought was going to happen if at graveside he was going to absolve him of anything, but apparently there was grievance between the minister and the priest and this individual. I mean, on an individual level, there was betrayal going on somewhere in there, and some revenge was taken. But we're not supposed to.
Yeah, I went to a funeral of a friend who actually helped me get started as a programmer years and years ago. He ended out having an illness or an injury that prevented him from doing the job that he had trained all his life to do. He lost so much hope that he ended up committing suicide. But his family was nominally Catholic. They decided to have a Catholic funeral for him, and the priest that was giving the funeral, went right into it. And it was not something I really wanted either.
So did you guys hear that? Never invite a Catholic priest to a suicide's funeral. That's what I heard. Now I understand why. The Catholic Church has taken a very hard position on what happens to a soul of a person who is suicided. But to invite them to that kind of funeral knowing that is inviting disaster. Unless you meet with them beforehand and you ask if they can at least please not talk about it that way. Have you ever been to divinity school? Anyone? Bueller? I was going to ask if they ever give you a class on how to act at a funeral. Because I'll bet not. And that's one of those things that we think is tribal and everybody understands and knows, and we discover at the point of embarrassment that it's not.
I guess one thing we might ask ourselves is, at what point do you stop thinking this person was a child of God? At what point do you say, that's over now, so we can say bad things about it?
Wow. Okay, so that's where you were going with that. That's amazing. I like it.
And my example is, I think probably, it wasn't a funeral, but it was a celebration after the funeral that Bonnie and I attended. I think it was the last one, in which the brother of the deceased is somebody that Bonnie Joe relates to as a cousin. But the rest of the family all thought the deceased was a jerk.
Yeah.
Okay. Did we talk about him being a jerk? Of course not. His brother was there. His brother missed his brother. And even after he was gone, we weren't going to be disparaging of that.
Right. So that's a lot to unpack. Let me unpack that for all the people on the left and right who might not have heard Fred. And I'm going to paraphrase you just a little bit, if you're complete. Okay. So first, what is it that makes you think that at some point you're no longer responsible to that individual and you can disparage them as a Christian? Is it when we lower them into the ground? Is it when they give up life? Because it happens, right? And all of a sudden people want to have a funeral, which is an airing of the grievance. So ask yourself it that way. Well, at what point then do I give myself free rein to disparage people simply because they're dead and no longer here to refute me? That's what you've done. So I think that was your first point. The second point was there's a trend in funerals now to where people stand and accuse the dead. I don't know if you've caught on to it yet. I'm going to address how they really were. We're going to call them to account on their actions. We're going to tell everyone at the funeral how life really was. So one, because it's about them. Gene's question was why. They believe this will be cathartic. That finally I can get my grievance can gain utterance and I can get that emotional release and hopefully some comfort and forgiveness from others, especially if the individual has been hiding things. Like in a family that has deep abuse scars, you'll find this phenomenon a lot.
They're obviously confused
Yes.
because that does nobody any good. Maybe it helps them,
Right.
but doesn't help anybody else.
Right. And so we've got to be careful on when, where, and how we seek our healing.
Bottom line is if you're trying to express love as a Christian, don't do that.
So that's a wonderful point, yes, because all of this conversation is with the assumption that we in fact are who we are and we're Christians. I expect Gentile behavior from Gentiles. When I go to non-Christian funerals and fights break out, I'm like, It wasn't unexpected. It's sort of like going to a hockey match and not expecting to see a punch thrown.
I was just going to say, we're rounding about to these conversations or those conversations or conversations you have while the person's still alive.
I agree.
And in many cases, I would rather talk to people while they're alive. And I am currently dealing with my friend who quickly, abruptly died this last July. He was the agnostic, and I'm still crushed. And even 2 weeks before he passed, I didn't talk to him in this fashion in a Christian way, because he was asking me how do I get past all my pains, and it still didn't work out. So it was appropriate as a Christian, as a friend, and now I'm crushed.
Yeah.
Point being, have the conversations in a loving manner if we know these people before they're gone.
Right. So for those of you who might not have heard that, the easiest way to avoid what Gene and I are talking about, Hans said, is to have the conversations today. If you're that concerned about someone or you've got that kind of issue with someone, air it. In fact, that's exactly what Scripture says. That's the first point of discussion in a difference. If you're not willing to discuss it, you don't have a difference and you need to let go of your issue. That's the unspoken part that's left of the argument process. Sir?
Well, it goes back to that script that you had up there about 3 or 4 slides ago. You know, I love you, I forgive you, please forgive me. You know, if you're not going to be able to, if you're really forgiving someone, you're not going to be able to harbor that kind of bitterness that makes you want to go after them, you know, after they're already holding in the ground.
Healing through pain. There are people who prefer this. That's what I call it. When you have to hurt someone else and hurt yourself again to heal, that's healing through pain. And it's very tough, and it almost never gives us the result that we prefer. Ma'am?
I'm listening. I personally, I don't believe there are deathbed conversions. By the time you're at that point, I don't think that's what you're thinking about. And I think that, as you said, none of this is about the person who's dying or who has died. It's about the family. So when you're going after someone who's on their deathbed or at a funeral, that makes no sense. You're negatively affecting the family. That's all you're doing.
Yeah, you're not thinking about those left behind. So did you guys hear her comments over there? Okay. So how about that? Let them grieve. Have you ever seen people who grieve poorly? Who grieve through anger and rage and frustration? But it's all they've got? People who are mad at the world that they've lost a loved one? I find that a lot in people who know God and hate God. they lost something and it's not coming back, and it was something very dear to them, or there's a pain in their life and they blame God for it because they don't have a mature understanding of exactly how that all works. Huh? Someone we know?
Well, we showed a movie in the Cats Kids not too long ago. There was a character in that movie that exhibited that.
Yeah. That's the most common reason people who know of God don't come to God or leave God.
Very often people just cannot accept that someone they love or he died.
Yeah.
They blame God. Why you don't stop that?
Why did he not stop this? Yes.
And it's very often, I have friends that, and my son still is mad on God because his father died. And I just have to let that.
Yeah. So yeah, Vesna's got an experience in her own life where she knows someone that is going through this, and it's a lot more common than you might think. And so
We have to always remember that death came about because of what?
sin. Right. Sir.
One thing I think is important to remember is that we probably can't do anything about that. All we can do is show love.
Yes. Yes.
And I mean, basically, you cannot argue a person into accepting
Right.
what they're grieving.
I've tried to hold people under the water until I thought they were clean.
It's an emotional response, and it must be dealt with on an emotional
Right.
level.
Yes.
And who knows down the road what it's going to lead to. It could lead to something very good. It could lead to something very bad. But we just need to provide support and encouragement and comfort and whatever it is the
Yeah.
person's needing.
So, yes, you're saying everything, the point that I was just going to transition into, which is, have you ever just sat next to someone and let them cry? Because what they needed was for you just to sit there? I think it's very hard for a lot of people to shut up while someone is crying next to them. We want to offer platitudes and falsehoods and lies sometimes to comfort them. That's wrong. This is when we get to the in a better place. And, we start telling non-Christians that their non-Christian soul is somewhere in heaven. Please don't do that. I think it's important at this point that we just sit there and we provide care, comfort, honesty, and love, and let them grieve. It's natural. It's healthy. They should be allowed to. And don't mitigate it for them. It's as bad as it is.
One of the things out of my experience and that I have done was ask if they mind if I pray for them. I pray for the family to realize that their loved one is in a better place now.
Yes. Oh, no, I never say he's in a better place.
He's with God now.
He's not. This person is not with God. No, he's not. This is a non-Christian. Where do you think he is?
When you die, your spirit automatically goes back to the Father who gave it to you, and the body returns to the dust. So yes, it does.
I understand what you're saying, but there's a whole process in there of what the Bible calls sleep, and then there is judgment. At no time is that soul getting anywhere near anything you or I would call paradise or heaven.
Paradise waiting on the other side of the gulf for judgment.
All right, I think I'm gonna put paradise on the list. So,
Jesus gave a parable about that, rich man and Lazarus.
yeah. I want them to be there, but I can't agree with you on that one, brother. I don't think that they are, and I don't think the Scripture says that they are, unless we cherry pick individual Scriptures and look away from the entirety of what happens to us. Because if we all go, why God? However, you are absolutely correct that we should at all times do the one thing that we are given as a privilege by God for others, whether they're believers or not, and that is to pray. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I was short pointing. Let me long point.
As we grant mercy and we pray for someone, we're using our example. We can't save the person that's already died.
Yeah.
Okay? We just can't. However, our example might influence someone who is still alive.
Yes. So last story. I'm at a I wouldn't call it a funeral. This is a get together for a deceased, and people are sharing memories. Most of them are non-Christians. I'm a Christian. I'm a known Christian in this crowd. And I didn't think I was until someone told me I was because of this moment. So someone is up there speaking about the deceased. They are overcome with emotion. And I go on stage and I comfort them. I didn't know what else to do. I loved that person and I wanted to comfort them. And so we exit the stage, and then later on, at least 3 different people come to me and say, hey, I know you're a Christian, and that was a very loving thing that I saw you do. These are non-Christians. What they were really saying is, I hope someday if I'm in a time like that, someone comes for me. And that's the example. And I was honored to do it. I've seen an event happen like that once before at an actual burial where people stepped forward to assist. And it was likewise lovely. And I was so proud and honored to know those men. Sometimes the best we get to do is just shine, right? That's what this whole lesson series is about. Sometimes all you got to do is stand there and be a Christian. There's never a right time to argue about God, but there's always a right time to stand and be counted as a Christian for God. So let's do that. Any other closing comments? Fred.
Let's go all the way back to where do you encounter people? And
Okay.
one is when they marry into your family. And so we had an atheist married into our family. And
Yep.
I'm just leaving with this. So I confronted him with discussion. And he confronted me with discussion. And I said, the bottom line is, if I'm right, we'll both know it. If you're right, then I'm right.
Right.
I'd rather be on the side of winning both ways.
That's funny. So essentially, Fred is making the Descartes argument. Talk to me about it after because we're out of time. But it's the logical argument for how mathematically, if you're not a Christian, you're making a fool's bet. And so it's beautiful. And they use this to convert a whole lot of people in the Renaissance because they all thought that they were children of logic and they loved the way it flowed. So anyway, think about it. Think about the fact that you're always a Christian, always be conscious of it, and behave accordingly, and just try to shine for those around you. And we're complete, and thank you for your time. That's right. So next week we'll talk about forgiveness, and we'll see if you guys can forgive me for some of these lessons.